classes I give in Ottawa, the Yehuda class is the class that scares me the most.
Why?
Because any other class, I'm the one that's making a class, so people come because it's my class. Here, it's a class, and it's a group of people who come and decide that they want to improve their mood. They want to work on themselves, they want to improve themselves and grow, and they come together, they join together, Chabura, to grow and improve their Emunah. And it's something very powerful about a Chabura, a group of people that together decides to work on Emunah and we're going to work on growing. Any group that tries to get together as a group to grow, even an individual, but certainly a group that gets together to grow, very powerful. So I have an opportunity to speak to such a group, to take what you say very seriously, because if people are coming for entertainment, so it doesn't so you have to give an entertaining class. If people are coming to grow, you have to be very careful what you say. After we say something that's going to help them, help guide them. They're the ones to grow. I'm at your mercy. I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you grow. So God willing, tonight we'll work. Hopefully, I'll say something that'll help you in your quest, help you further your personal quest to grow. Well, that said, Pesach is the time of the Emunah. Pesach is all our Emunah stems from Pesach. There's two things. There's Pesach and there's Matan Torah. So Shavuos time is Matan Torah time. So Pesach is Pesach time. So now we're going to talk about some Pesach. How Pesach is the source of all our Emunah. Except like you said, there's a different aspect of Emunah we get from Matan Torah, giving the Torah. But other than that, Pesach is the main source of Emunah. And it's two things. Number one, it's the source, ancestry. Historically, that's when our group Emunah really solidified. Until we had the Avos, we had personal interaction, but as a nation, our national Emunah as a nation stems from Pesach. Secondly, Pesach is a holiday of transferring Emunah. And it's about, really two steps. Number one, it's for the kids. The kids, this is their opportunity. This is, we have the Masorah, the tradition, our faith, and our belief in everything. The Pesach is a set time to hand down that Masorah, hand down the tradition. It doesn't mean the exclusion of every other day. Every day is a day to hand down the Masorah. Anyone who has kids knows that chinuch, educating kids, it's a 365-day-a-year experience. But especially Pesach is the primary time that what you can do in one night of Pesach. Sometimes you can do more in one night of Pesach than the rest of the year combined. You still have to work the rest of the year. You can be ready for Pesach and think of what they're going to get out of Pesach. But certainly Pesach is the most powerful of any particular moment in the year. In terms of the Emunah, Pesach is certainly the most powerful of moments. And if it's not just for the kids, if you look, there's a Gemara in Pesachim. First it says that we're going to go to the Gemara. Going to page 54. So I'll start from the beginning of it, but what I'm really looking for is the end of this paragraph. Avadim hayim l'fal mitzrayim. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, to Pharaoh in Egypt. And God took us out with an outstretched arm, with a strong hand and outstretched arm. If he had not taken our ancestors out of Egypt, we and our children, and our grandchildren, we would all still be slaves to Pharaoh Mitzrayim. We'd be slaves to Egypt, to Pharaoh in Egypt. Had this not happened, had this Pesach not happened, nothing would have changed. The status quo would have endured. We would still be slaves to Mitzrayim. And we add on, this is the point I want to emphasize, even if we were all wise, we all had bina, we all had understanding. As long as the king, we were all elders, experienced, having been through 60, 70 seders in our life. We all knew the Torah, we all knew the entire Torah. Mitzvah aleinu, the commandment upon us, to tell the story of Mitzvah Mitzrayim. This is based on, this is related to the Gemara. The Gemara says, Kain ben Sholo. At this point, the son has to ask questions. The Gemara says if there's no son, then the wife asks. If there's no wife, then they ask each other. If there's only one person, you ask yourself. the custom in most places I've seen is that even after the kids say, all the kids like to say Manashtana, the youngest kid and the older kids, the kids like to say Manashtana. After all the kids are done saying Manashtana, everyone in the room says Manashtana for themselves. Everyone says Manashtana, the whole Manashtana for themselves. Because it's telling us a message that even if we know the answer, even if we know everything, we're not going to say anything we don't know. The person leading the Seder, he's leading the Seder, he may not learn anything new. But it's not just about learning something. It's about thinking about it and using it as an opportunity to grow and to think and improve on the Emunah. And that's the idea here, that just because you know everything, you might think, yeah, we said it all last year. We went through the whole thing, we did it last year, especially if you had, 40, 50, 60, 70, I've been these, so I haven't been through, so some people, they do 70, 80 Seders each year, 160, 160, if you live in, we live in Chutzlah, it's 160, someone after 160 Seders. Is he going to hear anything he hasn't heard before? Maybe he will. Very likely he will. If a new group of people, there is always more to hear. But even if he doesn't hear anything new, that's not what the Seder is primarily about. It's about reinforcing, for an adult at least, it's reinforcing and building on. It's a yearly dose, giving you an extra dose, a booster shot to last until the next year's Seder, to work on our Emunah again in the next year. Now, like I said, obviously, a continual process, just like educating children, educating ourselves also, continual process all year long. But the main shot, the main injection is on Pesach. That's the main time to work on it. And Haggadah is laying out the steps for us how to work on our Emunah on Pesach. Different ways to work on the rest of the year. But on Pesach, the Haggadah lays out for us the steps that we're going to be taking in order to work on our Emunah. So the first step is the questions. That if you start by asking questions, it changes your approach to things. It's, if you just tell a story, so you don't necessarily pay attention to the details. You start with questions, then it sort of brings out the points and makes them more and more significant. You're looking for something, you're searching. Particularly, it happens to be the questions don't really have anything to do with the story. So the questions were a page before this. So go back to page 50. The questions really don't have anything to do with the story. But the answer to the questions is the story. The questions lead into the story. How different this night is from all of the nights? How this night is different from all of them?
It is so typical and central to Yiddishkeit in comparison to other religions. They don't want you to ask questions. They just want you to learn by heart the catechism, whatever it is, Islam, whatever it is, Christianity, Judaism, start with the question. It's so symptomatic of Yiddishkeit, Don't shut up and just say what word by word start saying. Ask a question, ask. Get Yiddishkeit, we ask.
If you have something real, you're not scared. If it's a master deceit,
it's
then
such
you're
a
scared.
difference between us and other religions, And this one, the first question you have to know. And the Christian, it doesn't have the question either. Yes, sorry. The most important night of the year, almost, just ask me the question. Don't be afraid.
Every question just makes the story a better story. The more you ask, that's why I custom, almost
The
everywhere.
more you ask, the more you get into it.
And that's why the way to get the kids involved is they prepare questions in advance. They look and they ask a question to ask, and then they have, they try to stop you, and then they get their answer.
And the adults also.
And it's also, everyone. It's an interactive experience. It's something
It's something
everyone's working together at the same. We're all. So what are these questions? The rest of the year we can eat whatever we want. We can eat chametz, we can eat matzah. Halayla zeh kula matzah. On this night, we're only eating matzah. Now on the surface, that's not such an exciting question because we know, okay, basically eat matzah. But when you think about it, what's matzah? What's going? Matzah. It's I don't know of any other religion or any other idea that we say that this year, on this holiday, we eat unusual food. Particularly, we don't eat other food. Some people say we eat specific food to this holiday, but we avoid other foods this holiday, and we eat a specific food it's not commonly eaten. And more than that, it's interesting. What's the whole source of matzah? This is a big misconception. When I was a kid, I learned where does matzah come from? Well, they were in such a hurry to leave Egypt, they didn't have enough time to bake their matzah. And so they didn't have enough time to let it rise, so they had to bake it before they left Egypt. And then they said they didn't have enough time to let it rise, so they baked it, it was still matzah. If you read the verses, it's very clear that's not what happened. What actually happened was they made their dough. They didn't know they were leaving that moment. They made their dough. All of a sudden, God told Moses, and Moses told everybody, we're leaving right now. And they left. And they didn't have time to bake. Then they got out to the wilderness, and now they had time. And now it was time to bake their matzah. And there was commandment, according to some commentators, they weren't allowed to make chametz. Even if they stayed in Egypt, they would have made a matzah. But the idea was they were out of Egypt so fast the matzah hadn't even risen yet. The dough hadn't even risen yet. It was still matzah. And they baked it out there, outside Egypt, outside the cities of Egypt. They baked it and made a matzah before it had a chance to rise. The whole process, 600,000 men, 3 million people total, counting women, children, and elderly. There's only men from 20 to 60. They counted the older men, the younger than all the women, about 3 million people. Now, how long does it take to make matzah chametz? 18 minutes. If it's indoors when the sun's not shining, and you can't, and the dough is kept cold. When you're outside traveling, it takes even less than 18 minutes. How much? We don't have a tradition. That's why we always bake matzah indoors. We don't bake matzah outside because we don't know exactly how fast it takes. So, but we know it's less than 18 minutes. So in less than 18 minutes, the entire nation is able to get out of Egypt and already bake their matzahs outside Egypt. So that's already hinting to the answer here. But just the idea of matzah, it's a food that's symbolizing the very haste, the whole process. That there's a line it's hinting to a lot more.
The speed of the deliverance.
Speed of deliverance. And it's a hint of the whole food, and it's also a lot of other references. Matzah is called lechem oni. That's where we started. If you really turn back to the very, very beginning of the Seder. Say halach ma'anya. This is on page 46. Just the previous thing. I know I'm going backwards. Sometimes you have to go backwards to go forwards. It's a halach ma'anya. This is the bread of affliction. Bread of affliction, said the Gemara calls it lechem oni. The word oni has multiple translations. It means bread of poverty. A poor person doesn't bother with fancy things. He makes unlit leavened bread. It's also bread of affliction. They say our ancestors were forced to eat matzah. They weren't given more robust, tastier bread. Matzah, probably familiar, it sticks to the ribs. It lasts a long time. The slaves were given matzah, gave them more, longer sustained energy, as opposed to eating bread, which is easier to digest. So they have to eat more. So this is a bread of slavery also. So perhaps at the same time, it represents bread of slavery. On the other hand, it's a freedom. It represents the freedom. When we left Egypt, that's the bread we ate as freedom. Yes?
I have sometimes this question, like, if it's bread of affliction and they baked, like, they didn't have time also to make bread?
Right, so it's both. It's two totally different dimensions in the same thing. It's conflicting symbols. On the one hand, it's a bread of poverty, it's a bread of affliction. On the other hand, it's a bread of freedom. It's the matzah we ate as freedom. It was our mitzvah to eat the matzah. We bake the matzah. It's a mitzvah of matzah to celebrate the freedom. And it's interesting that the same object can be used to two opposite things. We're going to talk about why they're not so opposite. And slavery and the freedom, in a sense, are not exactly right. We'll come back to that a little bit later.
I understood that the matzah couldn't rise after midnight. Yeah, well, they had to finish the fast
meal,
everything
right.
at midnight. And then
Right, but that was a meal. They baked the next morning. They baked a new batch of bread.
yeah,
The
but
new dough.
it wouldn't rise, they said. That's the way I understood it.
So they weren't allowed to let it rise.
Yeah.
They weren't allowed to.
Okay.
So this is the bread of affliction. So the matzah is very interesting. We're going to see that the matzah is really puzzling, as Mrs. Shefty pointed out. It's very puzzling. Matzah, what's going on? What's this matzah? Not just that we have to eat matzah, we can't eat chametz, and we don't even have any chametz in the house. There's no chametz around. In fact, if someone owns chametz at the time he slaughters the Pesach, the Pesach sacrifice, he's violated a commandment, not just on that. And during Pesach, but even for the slaughtering of the Pesach, you're not allowed to have the Pesach and Hametz don't mix. So getting rid of all the Hametz. It's very peculiar. It really is puzzling. In the next question, back on page 50. So what's going on with more? Again, it's something we don't really think about. Yeah, more. We know more. We know more is the bitterness. Think about it. So why are we eating bitterness on a night that we're celebrating freedom? So why are we eating bitterness? Why reminding yourself of bitterness? It's all about freedom. It's all about the Exodus. Why are we going back to being slaves? Normally we don't even dip at all. Tonight we dip twice. Especially, this is an interesting answer because there really is no answer to this question. The answer is, so we'll ask the question. That's part of the tradition. It's something to think about. That the whole point of dipping, at least the first time we dip, is purely because it's unusual. The whole reason to do it is so the kids will ask why we did it. Which is a little bit of a circle. Why are we're doing something so they'll ask why we did it, and the answer is well, so you'll ask, little circular. So we'll talk more about that also. And last one, we can eat however we want. We can eat sitting, we can eat lying down, reclining, relax on our side. The way the Romans did, and this is what they did in the time of Gemara, they'd have a couch, and they'd really lie down on the couch, resting on their arm, and that way, very relaxed position. Tonight we have to do that. So today we don't necessarily lie on a couch. I know people who do that also. Most people don't. Most people lean on a chair, back of the chair, the side of the chair. But so that's
With a pillow.
with a pillow. With a pillow. So we're obligated to recline. Now recline now is freedom. Now freedom, very often you think freedom means freedom of choice. At least in the United States. Canada not as much, but also a lot in Canada. Freedom means you can do whatever you want. We're forced to be free. What does it mean freedom? We're forced to be free. We have no other choice but to be free. We have no other choice to express ourselves as free men. We can't act like a slave. What if I want to act like a slave? It's interesting. What exactly is this idea? We're forced to behave like free men. Forced to behave like wealthy people. What's this idea? And all throughout the Seder, there are a lot of other indications of that we're free. There are a lot of families have a custom that they bring water. At least the head of household. Some people, several people, members of the household, they don't wash it at the sink. The water is brought to them, and you're supposed to use your finest dishes. You're supposed to be Pesach. You use your Pesach dishes 8 days a year, and yet those are your fanciest dishes. You think your fanciest dishes are the ones you use on more often. Pesach, you use the cheap things. So you only use for 8 days. No one's going to see. No, Pesach you use the fanciest dishes. You have a chance to buy an extra nice set. You make your Pesach set, and then you demote your Pesach set and make your Pesach set a non-Pesach set. So for 8 days we're using, we're obligated to be fancy, to be nice, so what's all that about? So these questions, like I said, on the surface, are just very, most people don't even give the questions a second thought. But the questions are sort of half the answer, pique your curiosity, make you think, and hopefully I'm not ruining it for you. Hopefully you'll be able to go through this again at your Seder. You don't have to use my questions, but just, give you a little taste, whet your appetite for the Seder. We'll give at least some answer, and then as we turn back to page 54, at the very bottom, there's no end to it. No matter how much you say, there's always more to say. So the simple explanation is that you can just add on more details of the story. But the other idea, which is I think even more true, is that it's the more you go into detail of it, what we have here, this story, this Haggadah, the more detail you put into it, the better it is. And there's so much depth here. And one of my rabbis in Israel would give a Haggadah class every year. And his Haggadah class every year would take about 6 hours. It happens to be his Seder also took about 6 hours. He said different things, but I went to a Seder a few times. His Haggadah class was about 6 hours. That's after he gave a class on the Exodus. During the weeks when they read about the plagues in the Exodus, he gave 4 1.5-hour classes about the Exodus too, which partly that's what the Seder is also. So it's about 11 hours or so about Haggadah material. And every year he does another 11 hours, and they're not necessarily the same exact 11 hours. I was in that yeshiva for 7 years. So I went, I didn't go to Zagata class every day. I go to the Exodus class every year. So I heard those 6 hours 7 times. They were never the same 6 hours.
Wow.
Of the 6 hours, maybe 3 of the hours were the same. But every year he's adding something new. There's always a new dimension. Looking at it from this perspective, what do you see about this? What do you see about the way God behaves? What was he showing us? What was he showing the Egyptians? What happened from the perspective of Aaron and Moses, from the perspective of the Levites, from the perspective of the general public, from the perspective of Yisro, the whole series about how Yisro was the first convert, how he fits in the whole picture. There's so much in the details, and this is only what he could say in front of a crowd, for a crowd of 100, people from the ages 17 to 21. You talk about speaking to older, a few people older beyond that. The major crowd was 7 to 20, major age was 7 to 21. And people older, people able to understand more. The more you can understand, there's so much more, and there's no end to the depth here. And every year, why did it change? Because he just thought of something new to say. He learned it again. And he's now in his 60s. He learned it again. He had a new way to explain this new concept. He got this year. This is his understanding of Haggadah. His understanding of Exodus, and that's what he told us on our level, not on his level. But there's so much more, and the more whets your appetite. That's why it brings the next story on page 58 that they were up all, they came in the students came in the next morning. So who was the one who stuck at the Seder still saying the details? It was the oldest rabbis. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shur, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Tarfon. They're some of the great scholars. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, we just learned this, that when he was 18 years old, he was already one of the greatest rabbis of the generation. They had to pick someone to be the leader of the Jewish people for a short time. And Rabbi Kiva was their first choice, but he didn't have proper, he didn't have proper ancestry, so they were worried that people who didn't like him would be able to, would be able to attack him, so because he didn't have the merit of his ancestors to protect himself, so they were nervous that he would get hurt, so they didn't want to put him. And their second choice was Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He was one of the greatest rabbis, and he was only 18 years old. And there's all these other rabbis, they're the greatest, Rabbi Elazar Gadol is considered to be one of the greatest sages of all time. Rabbi Kiva, of course, and Rabbi Kiva is also one of the greatest of all time. These are some of the greatest rabbis you've ever seen. And they were up all night talking about the Exodus until their students told them, it's already time to tell about the Exodus. It's time for Shema. After morning's Exodus. The morning is Shema and Exodus.
That was during the Roman conquest when we were actually slaves.
Right. Also true.
It wasn't when we were free really, and yet they still, the whole night they spoke of the freedom and about the...
So I'm going to skip to the next couple pages. The page is the next page elaborates just how extreme, how significant it is, and how often we have to mention it. And it goes into the 4 children. We're going to talk about the 4 sons. We're talking about on these 4 dimensions of how to tell the story. And from the wise son, we're talking about the people who want to learn, people who are interested in learning, people who want to grow and want to work in their emunah. So there's an approach there to tell all the details down to the very last detail. You're very specific. Russia, you have to be very blunt. He's not interested in this. And you have to tell him something he's going to hear. It said, if you had been the way you're behaving, you would still be in Egypt. That's something that's going to wake up even Russia. Something he doesn't want to hear. You tell him, if with your attitude, you're going to still be there. You don't have any part of this freedom. So try to relate to him on his level. We're going to, punch him in the face. You're going to find one version of what we say, hakes shinov. One version is even punch him in the face and tell him that. You tell him on his terms. You want to make sure that he's getting the message also. If he's not prepared to listen to it properly, so you have to tell it to him in an improper way. And then there's the simple one. The simple one is interested, but he doesn't know where to start. So he just says, what's going on? So you tell him. You start to tell him and work him up, and slowly you gradually work up. And the person doesn't even know what to ask. So you open it for him. You open it up, and you start from the very beginning. Start with the very basic things, and you just from the very basic you build. And like I say, it's every year. When he doesn't get this, you're gonna get the next year. When he doesn't get the next, you get the next year. God willing, Shivim Shana, a person, average, based on Tehillim, the Psalms, the average lifespan is 70 years. 80 years with strength. Today it's a little bit longer than that. Even with 70 years, 140 Siddharim. So if he doesn't get it the first time, he'll get it the next time. He's planted the seed, you start working, you build it up.
Number of the year of the process.
Number 4, 4 cups.
A lot of force. You don't have time to go into if you want me to go into all that, we'll still be here next year, Pesach. And then so I'm going to just skip over how it relates to mitzvahs, and why we only have to do it on Pesach. Just skip that. Now we begin the story. Page 76, we just introduce the story. We say we were idol worshippers, and God brought us to be His nation. And that whole story ends, the bottom of 76 ends, we went down to Egypt. So in a sense, it seems a little puzzling. God made us His nation, now we went out to Egypt and we became slaves in Egypt. And if you think that's puzzling, you turn the next a couple pages here. Page 82. Sorry, go back, page 80. Blessed is the one that fulfilled His promise. He calculated the end. What does that mean? They say, what does it mean? That Avram was promised that they'd go down and eventually they'd come back out. God calculated the end to leave us in as long as possible. Sages say, had we stayed one day longer, we would have been so far contaminated by the tumah, by the impurity of Egypt, we would never have been able to get out. God left us there as long as He possibly could.
Just for a minute, so in the beginning, our forefathers were idol worshippers. The fact is, we never called them forefathers. We only start from Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov.
Even Abraham
It's the first time and the only time that we call Avotenu, not Avrinu, Avotenu. It's very interesting. I mean, it's true that we are originating from them, but usually we don't call them our forefathers. We start from Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. So it's very interesting that we go even further here. And that's the only time in the whole Torah that they are being called Avotenu, those guys before, pre-Abraham. But it's very interesting.
There's an undertone here that we wanted to be in Egypt. It seems like Egypt was a place for us to be. And we had to, and God wanted to be us there keep us there as long as possible. The sages call Egypt the founding crucible, the foundry crucible. Kur habarza, the iron crucible. That when you want to smelt iron, you want to get pure iron, you abuse the iron. You burn it, you put it in a fire, you melt it, and you really have to give it to the iron. You take a rock and you want to turn the rock into iron. It's a very difficult process. If you I wouldn't want to be an iron. I want to be an iron when we're doing that. It's not an easy process. But what comes out of that is pure iron. And same process with any metal, any kind of so much more so for for more precious metals. It's much you get gold ore. Gold ore is a very low content of gold. It's a lot of process. A lot of the
Smelting.
solus, a lot of the excess impurities are taken off, and it becomes pure. And Egypt was our core, was our crucible. That's where we were. We came from this. We had this ancestry of being idol worshippers, and we had all and these doubts. And the Sforno points out that there is from the time of Adam, from Adam's sin, he was given some kind of impurity. And Sforno says, what's this impurity? This impurity is doubt, lack of emunah, lack of faith. Adam had no lack of faith. He had absolute pure faith. He saw God face to face. There were no doubts where he came from. He knew all of a sudden one day he existed. Before that he didn't. He knew God created him. There were no doubts there. Because of the sin of Adam, so now there was something injected into everybody, and that was doubt. And that was the ability to have a lack of emunah. And so from the time of Adam and the time of Egypt, emunah was difficult. It was a whole process. It was difficult. It wasn't simple. Abraham was one of the few people who was able to come to the realization of emunah. The rest of the world didn't do that. You stop and think about that. That's mind-boggling. So the world population wasn't so big back then. But still, even if it was a few million people in the world, even if it's 500,000 people in the world, that entire world, one person, through his own logic and understanding, evaluating the world, came to the conclusion that there must be a creator, a singular creator. One person out of the entire world did that. So they had a tradition. They didn't forget. They knew. but they didn't come to it by themselves. There were a few people, a few individuals that still knew and still remembered. But Avram was the one person who didn't get it from he came to it himself. And then he began the Jewish people, but Jewish people and all the wives were coming in from other people who weren't descended from him. And it was a whole process. Avram wasn't a nation by himself. And even Avram, he came to it through logic. It wasn't the same level of knowledge as it happened through the Exodus. So in order to create that emunah, we had to go into Egypt. We had to be smelted. We had to be as low as humanly possible to be. The talking about civil rights, it would be another class just talking about what the conditions were like in Egypt before we left. But we were about as low as possible. The level of slavery we were given. Just to give an example, they say that the Pharaoh's astrologers told him that he had a certain sickness, and the only way to cure sickness would be bathed in Jewish blood. Every day he had to slaughter 100 babies and take a bath in their blood in the morning and 100 at night, and take a bath. So this thing, the complete we've never seen. What he did. We've never seen such lowliness. We had absolutely no right to protect ourselves whatsoever. We had absolutely nothing. And only from that kind of situation could we emerge and see the redemption, and the redemption would be so much greater and so much more powerful to see that redemption because we came from absolutely nothing. We're given our freedom, terrifying in less than 18 minutes, a blink of an eye, that amount of time, and all of a sudden that all happened. That's the most example to show us what happened. And that's why from here we go, you say, and this is what's stood for us. But this didn't just happen once. We weren't subjected just one time in Egypt. In every generation, in each and every generation, there's reminders that we're put in difficulty, so we have to cry out to God. We have to have relationships. It's ongoing. It wasn't just a one-time thing. One-time thing is too easy to forget, even though we renew it every year at Pesach. The fact that every generation there are oppressors, and you just have to look as far as Quebec. Big vote tomorrow. Just look as far, all over the place. There are people always standing, trying, in Scandinavian countries they're trying to outlaw shchita, and in San Francisco they tried to outlaw bris milah. Whether it's you can argue whether it's anti-Semitism or not. You can argue about that, but bottom line, they're out to get us in some form or another, whether it's deliberate or not. They're out to get us. In every generation, you think it's a free world, in the modern era, you think that it happens all over the freest countries.
The gay city want to outlaw Hila.
Right.
But to be like a Sodom, it's fine.
So it's in other countries in Europe also. Amsterdam is one of the freest cities. They want to outlaw shchita or milah. They want to.
Yeah, they're such a tzaddik.
So it's every generation they're forcing us to go back, and the only answer to all this is to renew what we did. As the story says, by the way, we were slaves in Egypt. It goes into detail again. I'm going to skip over that. What exactly the details of slavery? How bad that was? And it goes through great. This is starting here is really the main story. It goes through all the details.
And they find that the African countries, they sent many practitioners to Israel to learn how to do bris, because they learned that through the bris, the transmission of AIDS is being curtailed. So San Francisco, which is so busy, they should request a bris for everyone.
So we turn to page 98. What was the answer? It goes through all the details. It elaborates. It has to really know all the details, just how bad it was. The answer is we cried out to God, to our Hashem, the God of our fathers. And we listened to our voice. And he saw affliction, all the different, again, more details of what exactly the affliction was. The bottom line here is how did the process change? We cried out to God. We recognize on a very low level, so this is the lowest level of prayer, but on a very basic level we recognize that the only hope to our difficulties, whatever they are, our only hope is God. And the way to access God, the way to get Him to save us is through prayer. And ultimately this is the one thing, this is the blessing, Kol Yaakov, the voice is the voice of Jacob. The Jewish people is signified and is defined by our voice of prayer. And every redemption we ever see for the Jewish people, it always happens through prayer. And because that's the connection, and that's that's the idea that from the Exodus and for everything we see that God is there for us, and that's what the rest of the story of the rest of the Haggadah is all about. What did He do? How did He save us? And what did He do? And all that potential, and the more you understand that, the more you realize all that potential is still there. And that's where the Yehuda comes. We see that with our prayer, what we pray, what we ask for, Hashem is there to give it to us. And no matter how bad things are, there's always an answer. Hashem can always save us. And I know we're running out of time, so I'm just going to share two more sources. And I'd like to, like I said, I could go on for another 20 hours.
Just a moment. Now here we say Banitzak. We. Shenema. Veizaku. They were screaming. Can we say Banitzak? And we were.
Right. So only two verses and two sources and a conclusion.
So no idea. That's the people.
We can talk about that also. That's a whole that's So there's two sources and a conclusion. So source number one, the Haftorah we read on Chol Moed Pesach. It's a famous story. The kids know it as a kid song, and they don't realize that it's actually from prophets. Ezekiel and the dry bones, foot bones connected to the leg. That whole song. It's actually based on the Haftorah of Chol Moed of Pesach. So what's the idea? The idea was that in that generation, the Jewish people had no hope. The verses there talk about they were desperate. The Jewish people said, "We're gone. We have nothing left." Ezekiel says, "Go out to a valley and see the valley of dead bones, dry bones. A bone that's dried out, desiccated, there's no body left. It's about as hopeless as you could possibly imagine." And God told Ezekiel, prophesy to those bones and tell them to get up, have flesh go and live again, and walk, and it happened. And whether it happened literally or it was a vision, there's two opinions in the Gemara. One person said it didn't happen, another person said, "Look, it's my grandfather, here is tefillin. My grandfather was resurrected, I have his tefillin in my hand, it for sure happened." But either way, whether it was a vision or not, the message is saying, no matter how bad it seems, there's always a hope. Bones are frying, right? The people who left Egypt early, they weren't there long enough, but even eventually they got the redemption, they're saved. And just a statement, I mentioned this. I mentioned this maybe before, but it's one of the most important things. The Gemara says someone who combines Smichas Gula Tefillah, someone who describes the Exodus, says Shema, the Exodus last blessing before Shemona Esrei, says that it's all time of the Exodus, and then goes from there into Shemona Esrei, the Amidah, the prayer. He's a Ben Olam Haba. He or she gets the Olam Haba, gets the next world. He says, that's it? You do it every day. What's so special? That you say Shema, and then you say the blessing of Emunah, the Yetziv Nachon, you say even Emor, and so much more, so Shachris. You say that, and then you pray your Ben Olam Haba. Rabbi Yonah says that, yes, because what's it about? You just talked about what is Exodus. We saw that from Exodus, we can learn that God is there when He is, and He's the only one who saved it. We recognize that He saved us in the past. And we know that He has the potential. We understand that everything that we see through the Exodus, that can all happen to us. And then we take that, and we don't just say it, we put it into action. We say, therefore, save us. Give us wisdom. Hashivenu, return us to you in repentance. Forgive us for our sins. Fight our fights for us. Heal us. Give us blessing. Give us sustenance. Give us rain. We go through the whole thing. We go and we take that and say, you're the only one that can do this. You did it in the past. You're the only one that can do it. You're there for us. You did it in the past. You'll do it again. Everything we need, you're the only one that's worth asking for. We're going to ask everything down to the most mundane thing possible. Every little thing we need, we're going to ask for you. And that's really the message of the Haggadah. At the end, if you turn now to page, as a conclusion, just a lot more here like to do. Is at page 138, very at the bottom, through Seder, we're supposed to we're supposed to transition. In the beginning, we said our ancestors did. Now we're saying
maybe for that we say Banitzak.
could be. We need that. So because that's the one that's about the Haggadah. That's the verse. The first verse is the one happened.
So Banitzak.
Right. So now we say the whole door. We're supposed to view ourselves as if it were us. In this paragraph, we say we have to as if it were us. In the next paragraph, right, we rather say Lo Azavazin Bilvad. We left out the as if. We just say it wasn't just your ancestors. It was us. It happened to us. And we even reach beyond that as if it were us. No, it was us. We reach an appreciation. It was us. It happened to us, and just like it happened then, it can happen again. And we take that realization. From there, we go straight from there into the praise. Therefore, we're going to take the lines. We're going to praise you. We're going to, and we throw in a request here that just like we gave to this year Pesach, that you should redeem us again. We should go back. Sorry, that's at the end. At the end, first we praise him, and in the end, the blessing at the end, we say, just like you redeemed us, so too you should bring us, page 150. Bring us to other festivals. Come to us in peace. We should rejoice in the building of your city. Another kind of happiness in your service. We'll fill the Pesach at a higher level in the temple, where it will be built in our day. And through this, through having a Seder, through the realization, we can build our Emunah, and we can come to the realization that we were there the first time, we're going to be there for the next time. And God willing, we'll see the temple will be, even it's not too late, even by next week maybe, we'll have the temple, and if not, next year in Jerusalem, we'll have the temple, we'll have there, and through our service, for working on Emunah, we'll reach that level that God willing will eat the carbon Pesach in Yerushalayim.
Oh, man, thank you very much. So actually this part of this water is like the highest time.